Oh, wow, I didn't even read this part. Finally, in the longer term, we must invest in global green energy transition. Okay. Holy shit. This is like a whole deep dive I have to get into because I want you guys to keep this in your head, okay? Whenever you see global green energy, I actually want a few things to come to your head. I want the Great Reset, Malthusianism, the Open Society Foundation. I want those to trigger in your head. I also want this to trigger in your head. It's called the Club of Rome. So the Club of Rome, you may not have heard of them. It consists of 100 full members selected from former heads of state and government, UN administrators, high-level politicians, and government officials. Just a bunch of glowy establishment, spooky people, right? It gained public attention with the first report, The Limits to Growth. So this is like the center of this Malthusian bullshit, right? And these people have a vested economic, political, and social interest in replacing and eliminating fossil fuels. Because, I'll explain it to you. So the Club of Rome is almost entirely comprised of the Anglo-Saxon elite of America and Britain, specifically Britain, right? Fossil fuels, keep this in mind, have become a source of profound sovereignty for states to be able to have leverage over the West. And specifically, now here is where it's going to get good, specifically over the financial capitalist, global financial capitalist class. So fossil fuels have become a way for states to exercise economic sovereignty, self-development, and economic sovereignty, not just political sovereignty, economic sovereignty, at the expense of the global financial capitalist class. Now, the global financial capitalist class spurs development through loans, okay? Maybe I should do some paint here. So I'll explain it like this, right? So, I'm sorry. Yeah, here we go. So the global financial capitalist class gives loans, right? You got banks. They get loans in the economy, and this is supposedly going to fuel the development. This is just like gears turning, right? That's supposedly going to fuel development. On the other hand, if you have oil, right, underground, you tap that oil, you sell it to Western markets, and you use that money to fuel and grow your economy, right? I mean, that was the most schizophrenic diagram I've ever done, but you get the idea, right? So the Club of Rome and the green energy people, it's an imperialist thing, right? They don't like how oil has been this profound source of political and economic sovereignty. And I'll give you an example of this, actually, in history. So, how many of you know about the Arab-Israeli War of 1973? Okay, are you aware of that? So, it's called the Yom Kippur War. And actually, you may have heard of the Six-Day War, right? So, the Six-Day War was... The Six-Day War was like where the Arabs had no chance. They just, 6 days completely, they got their shit wrecked, right? But in the Yom Kippur War, actually, the Arabs did pretty good, right? They did pretty good comparably, and they were making gains pretty much, right? But the thing is that if you look at the constituents of this war, you've got all of these Middle Eastern countries, and you also have the United States, which is on the opposite side, supporting Israel, okay? Coincidentally, though, I'll tell you something. What do almost all of these countries have in common? The primary source of their revenue is oil, fossil fuels, Saudi Arabia, but also... Iraq, Libya, I don't know, Kuwait, I think. Yeah, Kuwait. The Soviet Union. Not a lot of people know this, but by this time in history, the Soviet Union shifted to being a petro-state. It shifted to oil as the primary source of economic revenue. So the Soviet Union is also a petro-state. So what happened? To punish America for supporting Israel, which was their enemy in this war, you had the 1973 oil crisis, when the Arab petroleum exporting countries, led by Saudi Arabia, had an oil embargo, right, on every nation that supported Israel during the Yom Kippur War. Okay? This created a huge economic shock in the West. It created all this economic turmoil, right? So as a result, what happened? Well, I'll tell you what happened, right? Yeah, for the first time, these non-European countries were exercising not only economic sovereignty to develop themselves independently of the IMF and Western loans and the global financial capitalist class, they were even undermining the Western economic system, the global economic system, right? So what happened? Well, coincidentally, in 1972, which was before the war, they published the Limits to Growth. So here's the first instance of the conflict between sovereign petrostates and the globalist, unipolar American, specifically British American imperialist ruling class, right? So America after World War II was like the top dog in the world, right? The top economic power, alongside the City of London and all these financial capitalists who got fat and rich, right? As a result of this. Well, hold on a second. The world's becoming more global, right? And more multipolar. And all of a sudden, you have all of these different countries that are no longer reliant on the American system. And they're starting to exercise economic sovereignty, which means they're becoming more self-reliant. They're getting their money not from Western banks and American loans, from British and American banks, and from the IMF. They're getting their revenues from selling oil, right? Yeah, the British Empire documentary, I think we'll watch that Thursday, or I don't know. I don't know when we'll watch it. I don't know if we have time today, right? But we're gonna watch that soon. We might watch it today. Who knows? But so what did the ruling class in the West and in America and Britain do? They said, these countries are developing a fuck ton. They're rapidly industrializing. They're using oil, right, as their source of revenue to fuel industrialization. How do we cuck them? How do we stop them? And how do we maintain our position so that they can never rise to a position of challenging us? Well, here's what they fucking did. They started to say, there's limits to growth. You see, we've grown as much as we could. We, the West, have developed and industrialized, so let's stop because we're killing the planet. So Africa, you cannot industrialize. Asia, stop industrializing. Latin America, do not industrialize. We have reached the peak. There are now limits to growth. Do not challenge our power. Do not rise to our level. We've hit the ceiling, right? So this is the Club of Rome. Now, weirdly, Bernie Sanders, who's supposedly this anti-establishment, progressive socialist, he's repeating the mantras of the Club of Rome and of the Anglo-Saxon global ruling capitalist class by talking about how we must invest in global green energy, turn away from fossil fuels, not only to combat climate change. I want you to underline this part right here. Not only to combat climate change, but to deny authoritarian petrostates the revenues they require to survive. This is the language of a genocidal war criminal. He wants authoritarian petrostates to be deprived of the revenues they need to economically become more self-sufficient and to industrialize themselves in a way that is independent from the global initiatives of the IMF, the Club of Rome, the City of London, Davos, and the Western financial capitalist ruling class. There you have it. Bernie Sanders wants these states that are currently sovereign, because remember, the word authoritarian usually means sovereign. Authoritarian means sovereign, right? The only reason states are authoritarian is because they're not these open societies that are just going to let the West come and dominate them culturally and politically. So they have to repress these Western NGOs and curtail their ability to influence and take over the society. And they're also going to be heavy-handed economically, because they're not going to have this free market where they're just going to open wide for Western companies to come and take everything. They're going to be heavy-handed and repress certain aspects of the free market to prop up their own. They're going to nationalize companies. They're going to do things for their own people, right? And these are all very authoritarian things, right? These are all very authoritarian things, okay? This is authoritarianism. So authoritarian equals sovereign, right? Anytime a country gets called authoritarian, it's usually because it's a sovereign country that does not answer to America. Remember, why is it that every country that exercises independence from the US is called authoritarian? Well, it's for the same reason that masculine men are called insecure, right? Because if you're not a masculine man, you're submitting to another man. If you're a masculine man, you're independent. You're holding your own. You're fighting for your own manhood. You're fighting for your own independence. It's the same when it comes to global geopolitics. In order to be independent and sovereign, you have to be authoritarian. Otherwise, you're going to put on a maid outfit and you're going to submit to Daddy America. It's literally that simple, right? All these like breadtube people have these weird fantasies of like feminization of men, because it's not because they're undermining patriarchy. Oh, the patriarch is still in power. They just want all men to submit to their own sugar daddy. They've submitted to their sugar daddy, which is Uncle Sam or Joe Biden or whatever you want, and they want all other men to do the same thing. So you could literally see how it's like one for one the same exact thing, right? It's about eroding sovereignty, right? And Bernie Sanders is fully mask off, right? He wants to deny authoritarian petrostates revenues they require to survive. I mean, what does that actually fucking mean? It means, right, that he wants them to be deprived of the ability to be independent from America and from Britain and from the financial capitalist global ruling class. So then you might ask me, Haas, well then why is Bernie a socialist? Isn't he a socialist? Surely socialists are not the type who are these imperialists. Well, I'll explain what that socialism is. So we're going to, again, I know this is like a million different rabbit holes we're going on, but there's a type of socialism that originates in England, and it's called Fabian Socialism. So Fabian Society is a British socialist organization whose purpose is to advance democratic socialism via reformism, right? That's the explanation they're giving us. But its history was basically that you had these ruling class kind of social engineers who were part of the bourgeoisie and part of the capitalist ruling class and the deep state. And these Fabians attracted all of these, you know, big names, and they attracted all of these capitalist financiers. And what the type of socialist is basically, it's a monopoly socialist. They want to turn capitalist monopolies that are created through imperialism into a mechanism through which, you know, you can have a more fair and balanced internal society. So Marxist Leninist socialism, I'll show you right here, Marxism Leninism. So Marxism and Marxism Leninism is actually about production. It's about the production and development of the productive forces. Raise our economies, industrialize, become wealthier, become stronger. You know, labor. That's the kind of thing with Marxism Leninism. But with the Fabian Society, they want to take the production that already exists under monopoly capitalism and just change the distribution, right? So that's the Fabian socialist. And that's the type of socialist, actually, that Bernie Sanders is. That's where Bernie's coming from. Bernie's not a socialist in the Marxist sense of wanting to revolutionize the forces of production and break the monopolies and industrialize more and build infrastructure and stuff. He's the type of socialist that just wants to tax the rich, right? And also tax the middle class. Like if you've made money as a successful business owner, Bernie doesn't care about where the wealth comes from. He just wants to take the wealth and spread it around a little bit more, right? And in order to do that, you can't have people creating this new wealth that's not under your control. So Bernie wants this kind of global socialist regime where no new wealth is created independently of the regime, and they could just suck all the wealth out of entrepreneurs and out of businesses and just redistribute it in a way that gives you control over society. So Bernie's socialism is actually kind of scary if you think about it. With Bernie's socialism and AOC's socialism and the Squad socialism, they're trying to use money as a way to control society. So you tax the rich more, and you tax the wealthy more, and you tax the capitalists more, right? And you tax the businessmen more, and also the middle class more. And you can use this money to engineer society as you see fit. You know, you can fund whatever education you want. You can fund the type of infrastructure that you want. You can fund things that are going to make us more controlled to the agenda of these, of the global capitalist ruling class and a Davos agenda. So, I mean, I don't blame Americans for being so anti-socialist and anti-communist, because I think most Americans see through this agenda, and they know that. They understand that Bernie's socialism isn't like the Marxist socialism, which is about increasing wealth and making more independent sources of wealth. It's actually about control. They identify socialism with control, and rightfully so, right? Because it is about control. Bernie's socialism isn't about justice and fairness and all this bullshit that he's talking about. It's a way to give our ruling class unprecedented control over the population. But the thing you have to keep in mind is that they don't just want to control us, they want to control the whole world, right? And that's this whole green energy push. They want to deny sovereign states the ability to develop themselves independently of the financial institutions of America and Britain, right? And America and Britain's financial institutions, the City of London, Wall Street, they control our government, right? They control our government and our population through debt. And guess what? Debt is a way to control people. Let me tell you something. You don't think Bernie's socialism is debt? It is debt. He's taxing the rich at gunpoint, not just the rich. He's taxing the middle class at gunpoint, right? Then the government gets to use the money however it sees fit to implement its agendas, right? To control us. Well, what about debt, right? If you're indebted to someone, they can choose the terms and conditions under which you're allowed to, you repay them. Otherwise, they're going to cut your lifeline off, right? So this is what the IMF does. They'll have these states depend on loans that they know will never be able to get paid back, right? And so when you need more loans, because it's an addiction. You go into debt, you go into more debt because you keep needing to take money to survive, right? Because you're not able to produce anything, right? So suddenly you get controlled. They give you more money, but they say, okay, but this is how you have to use it or we're cutting off your supply line. So it's like they become your sugar daddy, basically. And if you don't do what the sugar daddy says, you're getting cut off, right? And if you get cut off, well, you just got stripped of everything because since you're in debt, you've given them ownership of everything. I mean, this is what happened to Greece in the European Union. This is what the European Union does to the southern European countries. This is what it does to the Balkans. This is what it does to Greece. It does this to Italy. It does it to Spain. This is what the European Union does, okay? And yeah, the IMF, they did it to Latin America. They're still doing it to Africa. You know, this is their model of global economics, right? So here's the thing, right? Britain, 1970s, we had to take an IMF loan that began monetarist economic policies. Yeah, precisely. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn in 2015, thank you, Morlock. Appreciate you so much.
Chris Morlock donated $20.
Thank you so much, man. In 2015, Jeremy Corbyn was actually going to embark on an initiative to reindustrialize Britain. But his campaign got hijacked by woke leftists who ran it into the ground, right? And again, who were the people that ran Bernie Sanders' movement into the ground? Jeremy Corbyn's movement into the ground? Here it is. Jeremy Corbyn went from being a populist in 2015. Thank you so much, Ridiculous TV. Jeremy Corbyn went from being a populist in 2015 to being this like woke lefty who's going to be like just tax people and just read, you know, this flimsy kind of politician no one respects because of this. He went from one type of socialist, an industrial socialist, to a Fabian socialist. And the same thing happened to Bernie. Except we don't really know where Bernie was in the start. Whether he was duping us from the start or not, we don't know, right? So these Fabian socialists, do not get it twisted. I want to explain it to you like this. Now, who's that woman who came up with that term corporate communism and everyone laughed at her? What is her name? Who said corporate communism? Marjorie Taylor Greene. She talked about how it's important to fight corporate communism. And everyone laughed at her because it appeared to be a contradiction in terms, right? It is not a contradiction in terms. We do have corporate communism and corporate socialism. That is what we have, right? But keep this in mind, Bernie's socialism is in no way incompatible with the continued rule of the capitalist ruling class. There's no one who hates there's no one who hates free market competition more than the ruling class, because the ruling class doesn't want to be challenged, right? It's like being Floyd. Wouldn't Floyd prefer to be the only boxer? I'm sure Floyd kind of hates the competitive aspect of boxing sometimes because his title always has to get challenged, right? Well, it's the same for the capitalist ruling class. They don't want to be challenged. And the way that they're going to stop being challenged is by adopting this type of Bernie Sanders Fabian socialism that is going to enslave us to the banks, enslave us to the corporations, enslave us to Wall Street, and he's hiding it. You know, this guy Bernie Sanders, he's telling you that he wants to take on the billionaires and take on Wall Street and all this bullshit, but his agenda is actually meant to enslave us to Wall Street in an unprecedented way. As a matter of fact, looking back retrospectively, knowing what I do now, I want to go on record saying something. If there was an election between Bernie and Trump in 2020, I would have cast my vote for Trump. Because Bernie Sanders' Fabian socialism not only serves the agenda of the ruling class way better than Trump's does, it's a form of fascism. Bernie Sanders' socialism is actually fascist. Okay? Because what is fascism? Fascism is the unity of capitalists with a type of socialism to secure their own power, curtail political liberties, right? Curtail the market and rig the market so a handful of capitalists can stay in power. Now, Bernie has talked about the greed of Wall Street and the greed of the billionaire class. Have you ever heard him challenge their power? Have you ever heard Bernie say, we need more competition and we need these people to be removed? from their ruling class position, you've never heard him say anything like that. That's because Bernie has absolutely no intention of getting these Wall Street people to lose their position. He just wants to take a little more of their money and use their money for an agenda that controls us to an even greater degree and empowers them. A lot of people have this myth that Trump's tax cuts benefited Wall Street. Did you know that they took surveys of Wall Street and Wall Street didn't even want the tax cuts? Let me show you this. Wall Street, Trump tax cuts. I remember reading about it. They didn't want it. Wall Street did not want those tax cuts. You know who did like the tax cuts? I can't find it here, but I remember that Wall Street ruling class capitalists were totally indifferent to the tax cuts, right? And the reason was the rich don't mind paying more taxes. You know who minds paying more taxes? Populists like Elon Musk. And it's not because they're greedy. It's because they don't like how much control the government has. Because Elon Musk is a kind of populist capitalist. And he goes against the monopolies often, right? Because Elon Musk knows that the government spends money in a way that benefits the existing monopolies, right? He knows this because in his own experience, he had to take on the monopolies of the auto industry, right? So he knows it's a big game and it's all fucking rigged, right? And that's why. You want to know who else the tax cuts were popular among? Ordinary people, the middle class, who got less taxed. I mean, who doesn't like that, right? So again, on record, if you forced me to make a choice between Bernie and Trump, I would choose Trump. I would definitely choose Trump. And that's not because I like Trump. It's because Bernie isn't just a sellout. Bernie isn't just a sellout. He's actually dangerous. I need to actually make a tweet about this. Let me make a tweet. Bernie Sanders isn't just a sellout. He's fundamental. Him and his entire agenda is actually fundamentally dangerous. He empowers the capitalist ruling class far better than even the most bribed Republican politicians could dream of doing. And enslaves the working class. It's just facts. It's just facts. You know, you got to understand that this socialist agenda is actually, you know, I actually think we should be anti-fascists in America. But we shouldn't focus our attention on people like Nick Fuentes or Richard Spencer. We should focus our attention actually on people like AOC and Bernie Sanders, right? We should focus our attention on the socialists, the DSA, because those are the sources of fascism in this country. Socialism in America, as it's being presented, democratic socialism, is actually dangerous. It's not only dangerous to us as sovereign human beings, it's dangerous for the world. Because as you can see, the progressive agenda is not only is it allied to, but it is inexorably tied to a new wave of American global imperialism. Oh, I haven't even gotten to the Greens in Germany and stuff. Oh, yeah. You reminded... Thank you, Raccoon, for reminding me of that. You don't believe me? I got some news for you, then. The Pentagon's latest strategy. Promote socialism to combat China.